This is a response to Grady Fowles. Support the war or the troops? As combat veterans, I feel we are in important positions to oppose ongoing military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Note again how the pacifist position has always been against our war efforts overseas. It never was, we've taken the ball off of Afghanistan and we've gone into Iraq. It was always pull out of Afghanistan and Iraq. So don't believe the lies, and when we tell you that these are anti-war activists, be they from whatever side of the aisle that they come from, believe us next time we tell you this, because it's true. He continues, it is one thing for pro-American civilians to turn their backs on those annoying anti-war hippies, liberals, and protesting college kids, but it's quite another for them to tell a combat veteran that his views on the war are wrong. I would say the same thing to you. It's another thing for you to tell me that my views on the war are wrong and that somehow you speak for the rest of us. It is the Ron Paul crowd that has the money, that has the campaigning, and that has the staffers behind them. Not me. I'm one man. I would say the same thing to you. Your views on the war are wrong. I'm sick and tired of you guys using your uniform as a club to silence opinion from civilians. It's disgusting. There's a reason why we don't show up to political rallies in uniform. Precisely because of the things that you were doing. It's easier, he goes on, for pro-war Americans to hide behind yellow ribbons and bumper stickers than to risk being viewed as unpatriotic. Makes fun of people who actually support the troops in public. But to be pro-war, you must also accept the fact they are anti-constitution, wrong, pure bureaucracy, I don't even know what that means, and willing to kill people simply because they are born in a different part of the world than you. So, people who support the war and our efforts overseas, for national security reasons, he's basically labeling them as genocidal racists. People who want to kill people who look different than they are. That's what he's basically calling you. Instead of actually standing up for a position, he's slandering you and calling you a murder-hungry bunch of zombies. That's what he's done here. It's disgusting. There couldn't possibly be any other reason why you would support the war. It has to be because you're against people born in a different country. That's what it has to be. He's basically calling us a bunch of ethnocentrist, racist, genocidal lunatics who have nothing on our minds except for eradicating people from a different race. Where have we heard this language before? Is this 1993? Do you think you're scaring anybody with this? Are we all supposed to hide because you use words like Islamophobia or infer onto them? As if the terrorists, if they came from Alabama, all of a sudden we wouldn't have a problem with them. We're perfectly fine with our buildings going down and with radical extremists from Islam as long as they weren't born in a different country. Then we're fine with it. I know I am. I happen to be a member of the Facebook group Islamists in Alabama for Jihad and Total Destruction of the United States. Am I the only one who remembers who originated with this kind of slander? If you don't agree with X, then you must hate Y. It sounds distinctly familiar. Where have I heard this before?
A belief among many white people, not just in the South but around the country, that African Americans are not qualified to lead this great country.
Because there's a black man and there's not a trust in the intellect and the ability and the capability of a black man to run the country at a time when the country is having a lot of problems.
And it's just outside, wore a semi-automatic assault rifle on his shoulder and a pistol on his hip. There are questions about whether this has racial overtones. I mean, here you have a man of color in the presidency and white people showing up with guns strapped to their waist.
Wow. That film that was shown on MSNBC looks like, uh-oh, look out, oh!
But of course, I always look at the veiled racism therein. So I think that he is saying there were a lot of black Americans here listening to President Obama be sworn in, and they littered. Are you going to be with the black Americans who littered, or are you going to be with this lily white crowd that was here the other day and apparently kept the place a little neater?
Which Let's be very honest about what this is about. It's not about bashing Democrats. It's not about taxes. They have no idea what the Boston Tea Party was about.
That's right.
They don't know their history at all. This is about hating a black man in the White House. This is racism straight up.
If you are racist, you're probably a Republican.
It is through ignorance that many Americans believe that being pro-war and being loyal to the troops are one and the same. It is our job to inform them otherwise. I have a question to ask you, and something I've been asking all the veterans for Ron Paul. How is it that you separate the men from the mission? How do you do that? Since there is no draft, I gotta say the same thing over and over again. How is it that between the years 2001 and 2011, since there is no draft, people who enlisted and who knew exactly where they were going somehow can be separated from the mission? How does that work? People who enlist know where they're going. They're going to either Iraq or Afghanistan. They didn't support the mission? What did they sign on for? They signed on to serve their country in an illegal war? Is that what you're telling me? How do you separate these people from the mission when there isn't a draft anymore? It doesn't work. This is an attempt of the anti-interventionist, anti-war crowd to separate themselves from their embarrassing, horrible actions in the 60s. There are two great atrocities that occurred in American history, from my point of view. One of them was slavery, and the other was the way they treated veterans when they came home from the Vietnam War. Now, Americans, for the most part, have learned from their mistakes. But there's a difference between now and the 60s in that we have an all-volunteer military. Nobody was drafted to go over there. Good luck separating the mission from the men. We're a moral breed. We're not missionless drones who just follow orders despite how moral they are. Or immoral they are, to be more exact. This is the new in-a-suit anti-war crowd. This is the libertarian anti-war crowd. We're supposed to forget the 60s and Nam. I don't. He goes on, Washington, D.C. does not get off that easily. If stabilizing the region was ever their true goal, what are you inferring? It wasn't their goal? Then the people who run this country, past, present included, have made downright stupid decisions at almost every turn. An occupation and rebuilding appear to be afterthoughts with little to no planning. But that's not because they were ill-informed by their commanders on the ground, it's because they ignored sound advice from the military they put in harm's way. That's not true at all. I know you like to read Slate magazine or the Huffington Post, and you follow along with the general lines and the anti-war lines that people keep giving you. But here's a suggestion. The people you bash, the administration you bash, why don't you read what they say? Not excerpts of their books from Amazon or from Barnes & Nobles or from a book review. Why don't you actually read what they have to say? Why don't you read, like some of us do, John Bolton's book from cover to cover? Why don't you read Donald Rumsfeld's book from cover to cover? Douglas Feith's book cover to cover? Dick Cheney's book cover to, which I haven't done. I read a biography on him. I haven't gotten through his book yet. President Bush's book cover to cover. Well, since you didn't bother to read Mr. Rumsfeld's book because he is part of the prior administration with his, quote, neocon policies, let me read this for you, since I have to do everything for you. From a memo, and it will be listed in the description below, linked directly to it, from Secretary of Defense, from Assistant Secretary of Defense Internal Security, Peter W.R. Rodman. Subject, who will govern Iraq? The State Department, they're in little bullets here. The State Department has proposed a transitional civil authority, TCA, led by the United States to govern Iraq once Saddam is gone. The premise is that, 1, the Iraqi opposition is too divided to fill a vacuum on its own, and 2, the U.S. will want to control what happens with Iraqi WMD, oil, etc. My concern is that this occupation government may unintentionally prolong the vacuum in Iraq and enable the wrong people to fill it. Historical analogies. Historical analogies have been invoked, especially in comparison with recent experience in Afghanistan and the model of occupied Germany and Japan after World War II. In Afghanistan, the Bonn process succeeded in working out a rough accord among the competing groups, making possible an interim authority. Iraq clearly differs from Afghanistan in that Afghanistan, on the ground, i.e. the Northern Alliance, played a greater role in their country's liberation than is likely in Iraq. Iraqi opposition groups have much further to go before they would be capable of a provisional government. This is what leads some in the USG to study the Allied occupation of Germany and Japan after World War II. The theory is that only we can fill the vacuum, but this analogy too is flawed. We will have nowhere near the total control in Iraq that we had in Germany and Japan. There is already a lively Iraqi opposition which, despite its current disunity, will be essential for adding legitimacy to a U.S. military action. A more interesting analogy is with post-war France. FDR and Churchill planned an allied military government for France, the same as for Germany. They did not take de Gaulle seriously. Only after millions turned out to greet him on his return after D-Day did they conclude that he represented Free France, as he claimed. Had an occupation government been imposed on France, the communists who dominated the resistance would have taken over the countryside while the Allies sat in Paris imagining that they were running the country. Meanwhile, the occupation government would have neutered the Gaullists. As it happened, de Gaulle in power, 1944 to 1946, built up his own movement as a counterweight to the communists and neutralized them. The Iraq case. While Iraq has no de Gaulle, the French experience seems to be more instructive than that of Germany and Japan. There are bad guys all over Iraq, radical Shia, communists, Wahhabis, Al-Qaeda, who is trying to fill the political vacuum. An occupation government will only delay the process of unifying the moderate forces. The best hope for filling the vacuum is to prepare Iraqis to do it. Thus, I see Afghanistan as the model to be emulated, even if the Iraqis are not yet ready for their Bonn process. We should accelerate the process of unifying the opposition. More or less, the 6 organizations that were represented in Washington on 9/10 in August, into a coherent political force. First, there should be a common program. Using our considerable leverage, we should then press them to form an umbrella group with the aim of setting up a provisional government in the near term. The sooner they work out their mutual relations and allocate power among themselves, the better. The U.S. has enough leverage to reach firm understandings with this umbrella group or provisional government on issues that concern us, e.g. oil, WMD, relations with Turkey, Kuwait, Jordan, Kurdish autonomy. That's for those of us who bother to take the time to actually read about what's going on. Essentially, there was a plan from the beginning, even before the invasion, to get Iraqi leaders together to form some kind of Iraqi government so that there wouldn't have to be an occupation. The problem was that the CIA had the CIA, including Colin Powell's State Department, which later followed Paul Bremer and Richard Armitage, had an issue with one of the members of this supposed provisional government, which was Ahmed Chalabi from past experiences. They refused to allow him anywhere near the government. Anywhere near it. This led to what? This led to Paul Bremer and his occupation government, which we can argue as one of the fueling fires for the insurgency. So thank you, Paul Bremer. And thank you, Colin Powell. Thank you, Richard Armitage. And thank you, State Department. We appreciate it. Much. So don't tell me there wasn't a plan for after the invasion. There was a plan. It was the State Department and the beloved CIA who shot it down. It was Paul Bremer who shot it down against the Defense Department's wishes. But hey, why read about the squabbles between the Defense and the State Department?
This notion that we didn't listen to the commanders on the ground. I suppose Ron Paul was out there supporting the surge, not whining about how we shouldn't be there in the first place. Continues on. Even though I believe it is impossible to come out of any war smelling like a rose, our military created opportunities to keep at least some of the fallout off our nation. However, those chances are long gone, lost in red tape. One shining example is the fact that after we had toppled Saddam in 2003 and there was growing lawlessness throughout Iraq, especially in Baghdad, commanders of the Iraqi armed forces, no longer forced to serve under Hussein's regime, came forward to negotiate terms to commit their troops to the rebuilding effort and to the establishment of a new Iraqi government. Against the urging of our military, on May 23, 2003, the order was issued to dissolve the entire Iraqi army, leaving 400,000, if not more, Iraqi men of fighting age disgruntled and out of work. Fighting age and disgruntled out of work. I believe that order to be a major turning point in the failed effort to stabilize the country of Iraq. So what you've done is basically taking a critique of the war. You've taken the one that supposedly all people agree on and just dumped it into your article. It's sheer brilliance. Well, let's actually take a look at the Undersecretary for Defense and what actually led up to the dissolution of the Baathists in Iraq. Continuing on, the draft from the Slocum gave me declared dissolution of Iraqi. This is the Undersecretary of Defense speaking. Military and national security entities, including the following: Defense Ministry, Ministry of Information, Iraqi Intelligence Service, Special Security Organizations, Saddam's bodyguards, Army, Air Force, Navy, and other regular military services,